It is not just about diversity. It's not just about skin color and gender and age and mental health. It's not just about that. It's about you and me and all of us because we're all human and we're all unique. And we all want that sense of belonging. We want to feel valued. We want to feel respected. And that's why inclusion is so important because inclusion promotes that feeling of belonging. It has an impact on our well being, on our health. It actually shown that we think more creatively and innovatively, we're more productive. And if you want to reach your highest potential, you do need to have the feeling of that belonging, of inclusion. And it all starts with one, and that's you. I'm Heike Fallon, and I'm your host of the Empower Hour show. And my guest today is Eva Medilek. She's an executive leadership coach. She's a certified high performance coach, a certified diversity and inclusion communications trainer, and she teaches and coaches self-development and leadership in a variety of forms. I'm excited to have her here today. She's going to share a fantastic framework that you can implement immediately. So let's get started. Welcome, Eva. I'm so excited to have you here today. We're going to dig into the topic of diversity and inclusion. And I'm excited because you're an expert and happy to have you here today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here and talk about this and just dispel some myths, if you will, and take the icky and the scary out of it and just really talk about how we can all do better to create more inclusivity, to serve more clients and customers and our teams and all the things. So, woohoo, let's do it.
Yes, I'm so excited. Let's write in there diversity, inclusion, and it kind of gets always like lumped together, and it seems to be like, help me.
Yeah, you know,
and really go ahead.
when you think about diversity, it really is what's the word I want to use? All right, so your communities may be diverse, which means they have a variety of different lived experiences, racial and cultural makeup, sexual orientation. There may be that diversity in there. However, it may not be safe and inclusive for people. And so I'll give you an example. Back in this country, back in the early 60s, there was a landmark civil rights case called Brown versus Board of Education, which pretty much stated that it was illegal and not in line with the Constitution to segregate schools, to have segregation where Black children and white children could not go to school together, especially in the South. So that happened in the late 50s or 1960, and it wasn't until 1964, literally, that some of the schools in the South started to desegregate. And there was this one little girl named Ruby Bridges, and she was really immortalized in a Norman Rockwell painting. She had to go to school. She was 6 years old in first grade with 4 armed U.S. Marshals because of the protest and the yelling. So some people who are older may remember that in this country. And so the white people took their children out of schools. They refused to have their children go to school with a little Black girl. And there was one teacher by the name of Barbara Henry who was willing to teach Ruby, and she taught her in a classroom by herself. So that is a good example of a school being diverse, right? But not inclusive. So inclusion refers to how people feel at work, how their environments are safe for them to grow and have opportunities and access like everyone else, and people don't feel separate or apart or different. It really is creating a container where people can be brave, can feel safe, can be authentically who they are without any fear. So that's kind of the difference. Diversity kind of ticks the box.
Yeah.
Inclusion really embraces everyone as belonging. And so,
Yeah. And if I may say, knowing, where leadership has gone to now, it's not the command style anymore, and most companies really are shifting to really more a trust and inspire, as we call it, leadership. It requires to create a safe environment, because we know when there's a safe environment, a trusting environment, people can thrive to your full potential. And if we're not feeling included and belonging, it impacts our performance. And you,
yes.
as a high performance coach, knows that 100% as we coach on this, but
Yeah.
also your health, which, the
Yeah.
component that I integrate there as well. It's like, if you don't feel belonging, if you don't feel you're part of it, if you're not trusting and in that environment that you're in, it impacts your health and performance, and you can't show up as the best self and as an effective leader. So we can't close our eyes and forget about it. It is where we
Yeah,
need
we
to
can't just tick the
deeper.
box.
No.
You can't be a high performer without incorporating inclusivity, but you also can't perform at a high level, like you said, when you don't feel included or safe. And what I'm noticing with a lot of leadership of a certain generation is that they feel that as long as the environments are diverse, it's automatically inclusive, and it's not. But what the younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Zers are noticing, if their environments don't feel safe and included, they don't stay with the company. They don't have that same level of loyalty. They don't give their company their best stuff if they don't feel that the workplace culture and environment is inclusive. So it impacts the bottom line. And so we can't just brush it off.
Actually, you already nailed that again. Thank you for again putting out the diversity checkbox does not mean inclusion. And another very important part you just said is companies will lose valuable employees because they're not feeling included.
Yeah.
And again,
This
that's not,
generation is not putting up with it.
and again, it's not just skin color, it's culture. I mean, I'm German and I've experienced being different in a different country. It's
Yeah.
gender, it's that diversity is way more and impacts a lot of different people. And we need to really work on inclusion. Now, how did you get so strongly into it? Because I know you have a fascinating background, but you first became also a high performance coach. And
Yeah, yeah. I like to say I was born a dental hygienist, so I was born in the dental world. Literally, my mom told me, like, you would not stop brushing your teeth. I had to pull you out of the bathroom. So it was destined for me to have a career in dentistry. And then I moved from dentistry into entrepreneurship as a real estate investor. And that's how I actually got into coaching. And it still wasn't enough to just coach people on the knowledge when they really needed to learn how to just be a high performer, learn how to implement and take action, be clear, prioritize, be able to have that success at home and at work and in their communities. Because how you do one thing is how you do everything. But when I really got involved in diversity and inclusion was when George Floyd was murdered. And it affected me in a way that I was surprised, because as a woman of color, I actually became used to, numb to hearing stories of police brutality against Black men. And to me, it was just another incident at that. But for some reason, because of when it happened and we were all locked down in COVID, this story really escalated. And so did the protests, and the news wouldn't let it go. And I thought, what is this video they're talking about? I had no desire to see it, but I forced myself to see it. And when I watched it, it literally broke my heart. Like, to the point, Heike, I could not stop crying day and night. And I'm married to a German. who doesn't have the same lived experience that I have, number one, in America, and number two, as a person of color, and number three, as a female, right? Like all of those things. He can't relate. And one thing I have to say I appreciate about him during that time, he did not try to bypass it. He did not try to say, it's okay, it'll be all right. He spoke my love language to me, which is a very foreign language from German, where he just held me and hugged me, because that's my love language. And I'm forever grateful to him for that. But at the same time, now I digress. I knew I had to do something. I could not have business as usual, and I had to make an impact. My dad guarded Dr. Martin Luther King a week before his assassination. There is such history of civil rights in our family, and I was leading a life of privilege because of it and taken for granted. And I'm like, okay, I need to honor all of the sacrifices of the people before me by doing something. I just can't sit on my arse and and not do anything and just be in my privilege. And what I did was I got together 5 other leading women of color, and we put on a forum, and we called it the Allyship Awareness Forum. It was a 3-hour live event. I think I had over 700 people sign up for it. And it was a listen and learn event. And we all got to share our stories, our perspectives, and what people could do to show that they're in solidarity and in allyship, because it was kind of an all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And that's when I got into the work. And that led to me having a Facebook group for people that have skin color privilege. So just because you're white doesn't mean that
Yep.
you had a white experience, but you do have certain privileges from the skin color. I called that the intimacy of race. I ultimately wrote a book called The Intimacy of Race, which really was a synopsis of that forum, if you will. And I really got into it. And I know that I get to really use my voice to bring more people together without shame, blame, or guilt, in a way that teaches us how to communicate to each other that is in an inclusive way, and not building more barriers or bridges between us, but really breaking down those barriers and helping us listen and understand each other's perspectives. So that's the long drive.
Yeah, but that's
the story. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, because there's always some kind of personal connection, and I love hearing that. It's I think that is just so who you are, right? But then it evolves to something even bigger, because you're I have to say really quick, I love that, when you shared just your husband gave you a hug, that was inclusion. That was making you feel safe and included, and showing that, right? That's like as sometimes little inclusion can be, right?
And you hit the nail on the head with that, Heike. And I just want to expound on the power of what you just said there. So often we want to make people feel better, that the words that we use can end as condescending. It can end as bland as bypassing. And I didn't need him to say, I understand what you're going through, because there's no way he could.
Yeah,
But how often do we
exactly.
do that? Or how often does somebody say something that completely doesn't touch what you're experiencing? And that's why it's so important to listen more than talk. He knew from experience what my love language was.
Yeah.
He knew that anything he would have said in that moment may not have landed well, even though his intentions were good.
Yeah.
And so part of the process of creating those safe, inclusive environments is learning how to listen and not be so quick to react, to come back with a better or different insight, to tell us, well, this is what you should do. You don't should on other people, but you just want to hear and maybe ask questions, what would you like me to do? Open-ended questions that help bring either collaboration or forward movement. And so I love that you noticed that. He didn't try to say anything.
Yeah.
I love him for that.
Yeah, and we're gonna dig into this in a second even more, but that's the conversation I had too when we're talking about trauma. Often people want to say things, and it's just there is you don't know how it feels for the person. And oftentimes we just need to be there. It can be silent, and that is part of embracing the other person, making them feel safe by just being there. And but let's dive in. What can companies do? What can individuals do? So what are some strategies? So listening. Big
Yes,
one.
yes. I actually have a framework, believe
Okay.
it or not, that is called, an inclusive listening framework. And because
Mhm.
poor Britt loves acronyms, I created an acronym for it. And it's called the LAPI
Uh-huh.
listening framework, because here's the thing. I'm going to share just another quick
Mhm.
story. There was a guy named Daryl Davis. Um, he was an aspiring musician. He played with some of the old school greats like Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, B.B. King, the likes. But that's not why he's famous. He's famous because he went out of his way to befriend the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, Roger Kelly. What this man did is he spent years building trust between the Grand Riz, I always say the Grand Poobah from a cartoon, but the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and they became friends. I mean, they had dinner together, they ate at each other's homes. I mean, Davis even went so far to attend Klan rallies as this man's guest, and he was a large Black man. So that's what makes this significant. And but what he did that stood out was he cultivated an atmosphere of listening, and listening is a critical leadership skill. So he didn't hate Roger Kelly because Roger Kelly hated him, but he listened to Roger Kelly. And then eventually, by his example, by his role modeling, you're a high performance coach too, so you know how important role modeling is. Kelly started listening to him, and eventually they realized that they had more in common than not. And
Mhm.
what ended up happening was Roger Kelly ended up denouncing his ties to the Klan
Mhm.
and gave Daryl Davis his hood and robe, as is had did I think 200 other Klansmen, because they listened and they got to learn about each other and understand each other. And so that's why the foundation of creating inclusive environments is listening, because listening will serve to deepen the understanding of the listener, but also create that feeling of being heard and
Yeah.
understood and acknowledged without judgment or criticism from the speaker's point of view. So I'm going to go through the framework with you.
Yeah, I love to hear it.
Yeah, LAPI. So the L stands for listening. Because when you think about it, culture guides how we use language, right? How
Mhm.
we view what's appropriate and what's not, basically how we hold our worldview. And so our position gives us our perspective. And I use a slide in my presentations where, the number 6, you have one person standing at the bottom and it looks like a 6, but
Yeah.
another person standing at the other end, it looks like a 9. Like, who are you going to say is wrong? But because of where they're standing in life, they're
Both are
seeing
right.
things differently. So we have to listen to one another to learn what that perspective is and how they're seeing things, right? Then you have the A in the LAPI framework, which stands for acknowledgement. So acknowledgement in itself is the practice of inclusion, because we want to acknowledge another person's message. It's kind of similar to our persuasion session. We want to acknowledge their struggles, their challenges, their triumphs. We also want to acknowledge in a way that lets them know we've heard them. And so that's where we acknowledge by paraphrasing. That's the P,
Mhm.
because people want to know that you heard what they said. And a lot of times, I don't know if this has happened in your marriage, but in my marriage, I say one thing, by the time it travels to his ears, it has changed meaning altogether. And it's like, what? That's not what I meant at all.
Yeah.
And because we have two different native tongues, You know, a lot of times we
Okay.
need to check in to make sure we fully understand what each other's saying before we react or respond. So we acknowledge by using the P, paraphrasing, and that's just communicating your understanding of what the other speaker is saying. It's not parroting in a way, but it's just letting you know, here's my understanding of what you said,
It's a
which is
clarifying.
different from I understand.
Yep.
You
It's a,
don't.
yeah.
You say, here's my understanding. And that little nuance makes all the difference.
So it's really not about the interpretation. It's in that it's more like clarifying, this is what I heard, kind of, and understanding that's another level. Like
Yeah, and
that,
we're not agreeing. We don't have to
yeah.
agree or disagree. Like, I don't believe what you said, or I don't agree with that, but I just want to, let me be clear that I've understood what you said. That's the only reason
Yep.
for the listening, acknowledging, and paraphrasing. And then the I is when you come to the inquiry, because we've used paraphrasing to get a clear picture of the situation before we weigh in with the next steps, with our solutions. Because if you're like me, like, people are talking to me because they want me to fix their problems. Like, no, they're not. Make sure you understand why they're sharing what they're saying. But you want to ask now a forward moving question, if you will. I mean, an open-ended question, so that you can either collaborate or think deeper about it, get a deeper understanding if you need to know more information. It also fosters some collaboration and creativity and helps with solutions. You don't want to ask a question that can be answered with a yes or no, because that just can stunt it right there and keep it from moving forward. So you want to ask, I call it the what or how questions, because that creates the space. Like, so what would you, and we've learned this a lot in some of the trainings you and I have been in together, what would be the best outcome for you in this situation? What would you like to see happen? Who do you need to speak to get the answers you need, or whatever that is. But you want to ask questions that help people think, but also help you understand better, so that, and it doesn't mean that you agree or disagree, don't get me wrong, you're not just going along with everybody to keep the peace. We get to have our authenticity, and deeper in my trainings I go into what to do when the conversations are difficult, are uncomfortable, you fundamentally don't agree with the person, how to handle that. But this basic LAPI, listen, acknowledge, paraphrase, and inquire, is just the foundation of creating that feeling of being heard and understood and appreciated.
Awesome. I love that. And as all four are equally important, I want to just throw one little comment on the P. Because from a brain perspective and what we call interception, so from our internal information coming in, right, that has an impact on how we perceive the world and what we're listening to. So it could be different how I'm feeling right now. If I'm feeling terrible later today and I'm in the same situation, I may perceive something differently just because I feel different. And so that paraphrasing is so important, so that at that moment, two people or multiple people are on the same page to even have a conversation. So there's so much happening. How, and I'm not going in that, but how we perceive and what we hear is so personal at where
I
we
know.
are at that moment, and in so many factors. So just wanted to throw that in there. So
That's so spot on. I'll share a funny story, and my husband's gonna kill me for always using them in the stories, but there was one Sylvester Christmas, New Year's Eve, where I asked him, I was like, I don't want to go out with anybody. I just want to be home alone with you, and we'll make a nice dinner, snuggle on the couch, fall asleep. Because in past years, we've either been in Germany, partying all night. And I was like, I just want you to myself. And I'm thinking I'm being really loving and expressing my love. And he shut down and stopped speaking to me for the whole day. And I didn't know what was going on. And I'm like, oh my God, my husband doesn't love me anymore. What's wrong with him? He didn't stay with me for New Year's Eve. He went to bed early without me. I mean, it was like a train wreck. And by the time we got out of our heads and spoke to each other, I finally said to him, I was like, when I asked you for a New Year's Eve alone, like, what did you hear me said? Well, what I heard was, for the past 20 years, you had miserable New Year's Eves with me. And I was like, no, that's not what I meant at all. I just wanted something different this time. Blah, blah, blah. But we can get something in our head. And if we don't inquire, make sure that we have a right understanding, it could lead to divorce. No, I'm exaggerating, but really, we both kind of melted, came down and like, okay, let's have a do-over. We'll do it again, because we usually do fondue or something, and just have a lovely evening. But it's just an example where I didn't practice what I was preaching. I got my feelings hurt because the way I interpret is his silence. His feelings were hurt by the way he interpreted my request. And we just literally split and went in two different directions. And that's what's happening so much in our society. We're not taking the time to have the conversations, difficult and as uncomfortable as they may be, to make sure that we at least fully understand the other person's point of view and perspective.
Yes, and also what comes to mind, me, coming from a different culture, certain phrasing sometimes are not meant a certain way in this culture,
Yeah.
but they
That's
can
true.
be in that certain tone, kind of come across differently. And that's why it's so important to follow like frameworks like that to clarify and have rather a little more conversation about it. Like one
Yeah.
example,
Let me make sure I'm getting this right
well,
now.
in America,
Correct
for
me if I'm
example,
wrong.
I mean, for example, in America, saying is like, like, hey, good for you that happened. For German, it sounds like, yeah, good for you, like you got, yeah, so good for you, it's kind of has this little undertone, but that's
Yeah,
because of where it's coming from. And if we're not clarifying and we're just letting it sit there,
yeah,
then it builds up. And
it does. It does.
when things
That's
build
why I
up,
prefer these be verbal
yeah,
conversations, not on your Slack, not on your Teams, not in your texts, not in your emails. Like, hey, let's get on the phone, to discuss this and go from there, or have a meeting or have coffee or whatever, because sometimes we inflect tones that aren't intended. Sometimes, all the time, dare I say, most of the time, we
yeah,
inflect
most of
tones
the
that
time.
aren't intended, and then, resentment builds that didn't necessarily have to. Because I read back some of my own emails, and I'm like, that sounded horrible, because that's how I sound when I rush. And then I always have to say, oh my God, the tone in that sounded terrible. I totally didn't mean it that way. I was rushing. Please forgive me.
Yeah.
Because I've like read it and I'm like, oh my God, I sounded like a real jerk in there.
Little
So
reminder to reread.
yeah,
Because
but I'm reading from a different, I'm listening to myself from a different ear, and then you go back 24 hours later, it's like, oh,
but it's
yeah,
so much more important now as we are more digitally communicating, and these we don't see the person, we don't hear the tone of voice, and it's much more variety to interpret it, like the tone in an email.
yeah, yeah.
And we do need to be careful with that.
Yeah, and so important conversations. Yes, we do need to communicate by text and email. That's just real life. But if it's something that's very critical and crucial and an important conversation, I would encourage people to really make the space to have a conversation, even on, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever, so that you can hear each other's hearts too as you're talking.
Yeah, so love that framework. By the way, all information, Eva's information is in the description. So if you want to reach out to her, that's all there. What is the biggest challenge that leaders have to be more inclusive?
To be more inclusive, it froze for a second, so I think I heard you say to be more inclusive. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. I think the biggest challenge leaders have is that they think they are already.
Oh, okay.
and they don't know what they don't know.
How would
You
I
know,
know?
yeah, I talk to leaders all the time, and I have people say things to me, well, I don't see color. They're not fully understanding the effect of their unconscious biases, because in their heart, they see themselves as not being racist. But I'm here to say we all are, me, you, everyone. We all have biases from our culture, our early life experiences. There was an experiment done in the 1940s called the doll test, and they recreated it with Italian children. So basically, they took a bunch of brown children, gave them a white doll and a brown doll, and asked them questions. Which one's good? Which one's bad? Which one's nice? Which one's mean? And, all of the negativity. This is how children saw themselves because of their skin color.
Mm-hmm.
Was really I mean, it's a heartbreaking experiment to watch these children, just their little spirits fade when you ask all those questions, and then they ask, which doll looks most like you? And
Yep.
they picked the one that they said was a bad doll and a mean doll and a not nice doll, and it's just heartbreaking. So because our biases are unconscious, we need to be accountable to each other to bring them up in a way, not to blame or shame or guilt someone, but as an opportunity for someone to be aware and to learn and grow from them. And that is the problem everybody has, because I believe everyone's heart's in the right place. And if they get called out for either a microaggression or an unconscious bias, embarrassment keeps their ego from acknowledging in a way to help them grow. And we need to learn how to have these conversations. I have them all the time. It's just like, I know this is not what your intention was. That's acknowledgement. And I'm sure you had no idea what this meant, but I get it all the time when people call me intelligent or articulate. you know if you heard somebody say that to me, as a person in a white body, you could say to that person, I know you didn't mean any offense by that, but when you make that statement to or about a person of color, there is an assumption that comes with that. May I share that with you? Because it sounds like a compliment coming out of their mouth, but in reality, it lands for me as the microaggression or the unconscious bias, that it would be surprising that someone, either A, is a female, you hear it in mansplaining a lot,
Mm-hmm.
or B, is a person of color, could be articulate or
Yep.
like, how did you expect me to sound? And so there's so much that leadership of today um, doesn't know what they don't know, and learning how to be aware of your biases. I mean, there's bias tests that you can take. There's implicit bias tests. There's check your privilege tests. There's all kinds of things. But just because I was raised to love everybody doesn't mean
Yep.
that you are not immune to unconscious biases, and it doesn't make it's a what you said or what you did thing, not a who you are,
Yep.
right? And so we have to separate that. If I said you said something that was racist, most of people landed as, you think I'm racist. No, you're not racist, but what you said has racial undertones. So
Yep.
it's all of those nuances. I could go on and on and on, but I know you have a limited time here. But
Oh, so, but the bottom line is, the challenge most leaders have is that they're not acknowledging that basically everybody's biased, and not just color, gender. I mean, happens a lot. My husband works as an engineer. There's little amount of women, more guys, so it's a heavy male environment. It is different, right? So in leaders first have to really be honest that nobody is above, everybody is biased, and acknowledging that. And then the
Mhm.
second step is really creating more awareness of, not freaking out what I'm saying, but more awareness of also paying attention what I said, to then go back and clarifying possibly, which also, though, doesn't that require the receiving person to also maybe speak up a little bit more? in order
And
to create.
that's where we get into the emotional labor of the
Okay.
weight, because there are certain people, these microaggressions are like mosquito bites. If you
Hmm.
get bit once in a while, it's not a big thing. But
Yeah, and
when
we
you're
all
bit
do.
several times a day, I actually show a video on this. It is really, really annoying. And why are we always the ones that have to bring this up? That's where allyship comes in. That's where everybody gets to be in solidarity. Like if you see something, it's like see something, say something. Why am I always the one as the underrepresented or minoritized person? The same with, females. If a male saw another male speaking condescendingly to a female, it
Yeah,
would have more power for that other man to say to that man, hey, what you said, what you did, not who you are, but what you said or what you did can be interpreted as da 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 da. And so, the other thing is that, yeah, we just get to stand up for each other and all, take the opportunity to speak up when we can and when we see something.
yeah, no, and exactly. And in all levels, because it's like, I can't relate as far as skin color because I'm not experiencing that as extreme, but I've experienced quite a bit on the jokes of German, Nazi German, World War German, which were jokes for the other person, but for me it was deeply hurting. And being even called, one for as a joke, but it's not a joke to me, right? And it hurt.
Yeah.
And so I think it really is too that we all need to be a little bit more open of who do we have in front of us? Who is this person? Not that we need to fully understand, but we need to be aware of, oh, okay, they come from this culture. They're maybe, this gender or that skin color or that, whatever it be, but just be a little bit more aware of and not just totally unintentionally throw things out.
And I mean, and so many identities are not visible to the naked eye.
Yeah.
So always assume that you don't know what this person is experiencing. You don't know what kind of trauma that they
Yeah.
may be in recovery from. And it's like all the things. But you know what? If you don't realize that you said something, and let me tell you how many times I've stuck my foot in my mouth, even, in a presentation, and got accused of either fat shaming or whatever, when I was just using an example on how to release weight. And all of a sudden I was like, no, it's not my attention. I mean, it makes you feel bad, but now I know, like, okay, when I say it that way, this is how it comes across to people. I can't do that anymore. I have to change that and be willing to change so that I am creating a more open and welcoming environment where people feel safe. But, what normally didn't, a lot more things are offensive now. And for
Yep.
people of my age, learning it is a journey.
So, as listening is the foundation, what are 3 things I can do to get started to better listen?
Well, it's the framework, Heike. It really is
The
that
whole
framework.
thing, just really.
When we listen, we've got to give our undivided attention. So listening doesn't mean, checking your phone, looking at what's in the background. But as you are listening, if you can acknowledge by paraphrasing, that will help tune you in to making sure you heard what the person wanted you to hear. Oftentimes I use examples in my trainings, in my corporate trainings. I'll give a situation and I'll ask people to paraphrase it. And a lot of times I'll throw in, I think they're not listening to me because I'm the only woman of color on the team. And people will paraphrase everything else except that point because they want to avoid
Yeah.
the racial conversation. And so look at what's important to that person when they're sharing and make sure you acknowledge. And if they're long-winded like me, and you're like, I can't paraphrase everything you just said. You talked for 20 minutes. Just ask. Your open-ended question could be, what did I miss? What else is important to you that I may have missed? And you just ask. And then I'm like, yeah, the fact that I am the only person of color on the team, that was a big part. Like, yeah, okay. got it. You're feeling.
Asking more questions and to get more information while we're listening, and going through the framework actually
Yeah,
creates better active listening in itself, kind of.
that's it. That's it. It's LAPA. You listen, you acknowledge by paraphrasing, and you ask more questions.
Yeah.
That will make you a better listener with your teenager, with your boss, with your colleagues, with your clients, with your students, everybody.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit, because I know you have a course. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's awesome, because it gets it to more people that want to,
Yeah. Well, I've created an on-demand online course because I know, especially people in education, their hands in a lot of states are being tied, even talking about diversity and inclusion, or really implementing a lot of the initiatives. And a lot of corporate companies are getting rid of those departments or cutting down on the funding and the staffing for them. And so I created a really, really foundational online course called the Inclusive Community Blueprint. And it really goes into the practical application of all of the check the box initiatives that a lot of people have already sat through and been through and listened to courses and webinars and trainers, oh my, kind of thing. But it just really brings it down to real life. It goes into the framework. It gives you examples of open-ended questions to use. It gives you prompts to practice in real life. And it also in your marketing, inclusive languaging in your emails, your marketing, and your text, so that they're not offensive as well. I mean, if you notice in any real estate listings, they're no longer saying the master bedroom and the master bathroom. They're now the primary suite and the primary bathroom, or the main suite and the main bathroom, because of its reference to slavery.
Yeah.
And so we get to catch up on a lot of that. And it really gives some real definitions. I use a lot of, videos that really make the learning fun. And it's not to really, I think a lot of people are so afraid of being shamed because who they are and the level of privilege that they have. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to help everybody learn how to talk to each other in a way that brings more of us together than tears more of us apart. And in the end, you'll attract more clients and customers. Your teams and your students will have better retention, because they know in your leadership that you're creating safe, inclusive environments for everyone to feel belonging.
That was well said, because just because fundings are cut doesn't mean we don't need it. We need
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to make it really super affordable. It's not,
more.
yeah, everybody can do this, or you can ask your boss to pay for it for you, because it really is a low end price, but they're really short, easy modules, and then you get something to practice right after.
Yep.
Go out and practice LAPI. See how many people you can, and I've had feedback where I've had these big executives come back and, I tried this on my 15-year-old and they really opened up to me because they would never talk to me before. So it works in real life in every area.
Yeah, and it's all about, as I always say, taking action, right? We need to take action. We need to implement. And these are great tools where implementation is made much, much easier if you just literally follow along. Now, what's getting you up in the morning? And I mean, you're such a high performer. I'm always blown away. You're taking action. But what inspires you and gets you up in the morning to keep pushing the boundaries, because you are? Oh, I lost. There's no volume.
Hello,
Oh,
hello.
there you are.
Okay. I have to say, honestly, it's the sacrifice that so many others made before me. I subscribe to the Equal Justice Initiative, and every morning in my inbox, I get kind of a history lesson. This day in racial injustice history. So whether it's with the Japanese internment camps, the Chinese labor camps, lynchings, killings, all of those things, I look at every day, I'm reminded of what people have gone through to get us to this point where we can vote, right? That's only since the 60s, if you believe it or not, that Black people can vote, that interracial marriage is legal, all of those things. And I am constantly trying to remind myself of what people have gone through and sacrificed for me to have the privilege I have. And I think, who am I to be lazy and not do anything, you know, to keep going? And that's what keeps me going. When I feel like giving up every day, Heike, I'll be honest, there's not a day that goes by. It's like, why am I doing this? Why is it so hard to get through to people how important this work is? And then I'm like, girl, stop. Just stop. You got a great house, a great bed, a great life. Like, who are you not to keep going?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and love it. Love it. I love that you shared your insights. And I think it's so important for everyone, no matter, we need a better, we need to be better together in communities and be more understanding, be more inclusive, not just have the diversity at a workplace, but we need to be inclusive. It not just work, even otherwise as well. And we all have to do our part, and we all have to really get better, all of us. And thank you. This was really informative. I love it. Again, Ava's information is below in the description if you want to reach out to her. I hope this helped everybody to, you know, really look at yourself again, implement the LAPI, and be more inclusive out there.
Thanks, Heike. I appreciate the opportunity. Bye.
Bye.